You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskens, your host as always. And for the first time in a number of years, we're doing a bit of a deep dive into our inner north suburbs sitting along Wanneroo Road. Best way to characterise that positioning. We're going to talk about Balga, Westminster, Nollamara and Balcutta with the only man I can talk to about these suburbs, the number one sales agent in this area, and a lot of the time the number one sales agent by volume in this state. Everyone in this industry knows who he is. It's Adam Naumovski from the agency, mate. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me again, Trent. It's been a while.
It's been a long time. You were one of the first people to come on this podcast back in 2019. I think we even recorded it in late 2018 at the time as we were setting the podcast up. You were one of the first people to give this place a crack. Now we're closing in on 300 episodes.
Well done to you, mate. Congratulations. Great milestone.
Thank you. Well, what that means is we're about 6 years along since we first started having a conversation about property in the area. And to be frank, a lot has changed in terms of price points, especially in your neck of the woods, hasn't it?
Most definitely. Massive changes in the last 6 years, in particular the last 3 to 4 years, but still going on at the moment as well.
For those people who haven't been listening since 2019, it'd be great if we can go back a little bit, provide a bit of a characterization, if you can, about the different suburbs we're talking about here. We really do see a fairly obvious stepping of socio-demographics and economics as we go through these suburbs that we're talking about today. Can you run us through Balga all the way up to Balcutta?
Balga historically is a bit of a lower price point when comparing those 4 suburbs. It's definitely entry-level housing, a mixture of townhouses, villas, predominantly R40, which has been developed over the last 15 odd years. And then you've also still got your original houses or your original dwellings on your larger subdivisible blocks.
How big were those blocks normally?
So 728 square metres is the standard block size across all of those suburbs, really in the R40 zoning. That probably takes up, I dare say, about 80%. And then the other 20% would be mixed, usually about 800 to 900 square metre blocks, especially when they're on corners or whatnot. But your standard block size throughout those areas is 728 square metres, which is historically a standard triplex size block, but things are changing in that space as well.
Something for us to talk about today, definitely.
Yes.
It's interesting, isn't it? I guess this is one of the early entrants to the downsizer, rezoning, medium density space. Balga was one of the first to be rezoned, that they blanket rezoned the whole suburb. How has that changed the face of the suburb really, and not in just the built form, but also demographics?
Definitely been a positive. It's attracted a whole new different demographic to the area over the years, and what we're starting to see now is a lot of young families into the area, a lot of first home buyers in the area. So obviously a lot of development, so a lot of villas, a lot of townhouses. So again, that first home buyer entry level price point, that's the changes that's occurred in the area.
Even culturally, things have changed. Balga, Westminster, Nollamara, Girawen. Historically, a lot of Croatians, Italians, Macedonians, that sort of background. It has evolved over time, hasn't it?
That has changed for sure. And a massive shift again in the last 5 to 7 years, I would have said. So, definitely a lot of different cultures coming into the area now and have been. And obviously, when that happens, any culture likes to be close and surrounded by similar people, friends, family. So then that attracts family members, etc., into the area.
Balga, locationally, that most northern suburb we're talking about today, sits just above Reid Highway. Historically, Westminster was a part of Balga, wasn't it?
It was, yes. And then it got cut when they went through the New North, I think it was called, the new subdivision there. And then, they sliced off Westminster. Then obviously, further up, you've got Nollamara. So Westminster, tracking really well. A lot of a smaller suburb than Balga and Nollamara. So Westminster's the smallest out of the 3. The turnover, I suppose, isn't as high as those areas, just purely due to the amount of dwellings in the area. Does fetch a slightly higher price point than Balga and slightly less than Nollamara, so it's sort of sitting in between. Although Westminster and Nollamara are now almost on par as well.
Historically, given it was Balga, the block size is pretty similar. Obviously, the zoning, again, R40, blanket R40 here. If you didn't know that the name was Westminster, could you tell the difference?
In certain areas, I suppose like any suburb, you've got your different streets and your different pockets. Certain areas you could, yes, but certain areas you definitely couldn't. And no, the block sizes are still the same. And that's the same all the way up through Nollamara as well. The standard typical block size of your 728 square metre lot.
Westminster bounded by Balcutta to the west.
Yes, correct.
Balga to the north, Nollamara to the south.
Yes.
So let's push south again. Nollamara.
Yes, Nollamara started getting developed before Westminster and Balga. What I'm finding at the moment is a lot of those blocks are very hard to come by now because the suburb has been pretty heavily developed, especially over the last 20 years. And some really wonderful pockets in there, some beautiful parklands, and demographic there has changed significantly over the last couple of years as well. A lot of professional couples, people that are coming in and out of the city. It's got good transport in and out of the city. So I think it's just been undervalued for so long, but I think the stigma attached to that suburb has gone over the last 5 to 10 years. A lot of young professionals and professional couples coming into the area and have been for a little while now, and some beautiful cafes and some nice restaurants popping up. And at the end of the day, you're 10Ks to the city, you're 10Ks to the beach, all the infrastructure's there, the transport's there. So it's come a long way, but we're seeing less development in that area as the years go on, and especially at the moment. I know off the top of my head 6 to 7 sets of new villas being built, for example, in comparison to when you go back 5 to 10 years ago, and there was 2 or 3 on every street. So
the demographic's starting to change simply because it's starting to get more expensive. It borders Yokine and Dianella, some of the more expensive suburbs in the area. As those suburbs start to become inaccessible, those people just filter into Nollamara, and as you can expect, the more expensive it gets, the demographic starts to change, right?
Correct. And that's what we have noticed, especially again over the last 2 years, is a lot of people being priced out of Chewett Hill, Yokine, Balga. They're coming over to Nollamara. I mean, it's the next suburb over. And when you look at value for money, you're pretty much next door and you're getting a brand new product, for example, and sometimes $250,000 to $300,000 less than a K or two up the road.
You head west across Wanneroo Road, you've got Balga, pretty big suburb, big Italian background when I think about the soccer club, and every second house has the plaster lines at the front and the gold tiles. And for me, that's a suburb that hasn't changed as much in terms, it's still retained a lot of its heritage.
Yeah, it has. And what you find there is, and being a Balga boy myself, what you find there is a lot of the people, the younger generation coming through, don't want to leave the area. So they're staying in the area, trying to buy land and build, or renovating the older homes, taking over the family home, whatever the case may be. But a lot of the people in that Balga Stirling area, that grew up in the area, don't want to leave that area. They want to stay there. So that's why there hasn't been that much change, especially to the demographic living in the area, which is great. It's a really good family environment and great community, but it is again split up effectively into 2 halves. So you've got the R40 zone of Balga, and then you've got the R20 zone of Balga. So the R20 zone of Balga hasn't changed, and all we're finding now is there's a lot of new builds going on in there, but nice big family homes for people that want to stay in the area. And then you've got your R40 zone, which again was starting to be developed a long time ago. And
You got a lot of 3x1s there, right?
A lot of
that was the
3x1s.
early Triplex stuff. Yeah,
the old houses on the big blocks are very, very hard to come by now in that little pocket, especially around your Harrison Street pocket, where there is development going on at the moment, but very few and far between because the blocks just simply aren't available.
Okay, I think that's a fantastic way to characterise all 4 of these suburbs. As we know, homogeneously in Western Australia, prices have gone up, but let's try and track where they've gone to. I remember the first house behind a house subdivision I ever did was in Balga on Fieldgate Square. Yeah. And I remember paying $365,000 for a 728 square metre block with a 3x1 at the front. Didn't have the money to do a triplex, so I thought, well, I'll do a house behind a house. Didn't end up doing the house behind a house, just sold the land at the back to a couple at the time, and this was in 2012-13. At that point in time, I remember prices had dipped to about those low to mid 300s from highs of 500s before, and then they again rose to 500s in 2014-15 for those development blocks. Ironically, if I just held the property and not even developed it, I probably would have made the same profit. But I learned a lot, right? And that's a big part of small scale development.
Of course.
What we saw after that was prices for those development blocks on 728 square metres dropped to as low as like $290,000 I saw.
It was carnage for a while there.
Real massive swings. Where is it at today?
Yeah, so it's increased significantly, and I think we've surpassed all of those previous years, and we're probably sitting at your 728 square metre block right now, all dependent on house as well. So if the house is a knockdown job and we're just talking about the block itself, mid to high 500s is probably pretty comfortable. In some cases 600 depending on the location. This is for Balga obviously. And then when you're looking at if the house has got value, if it's rentable, is it livable? Because what we're finding, obviously historically these blocks always sold to developers. That's changed again in the last year or two, and what I'm finding now is a lot of families are wanting to buy the house, renovate, and have the land size, have the backyard. So if the house is, livable, tenantable, rentable, then you're now starting to talk low 6s for.
It's interesting because that price point, I guess, is led by the highest and best use usually, and that would be the developer's profit margin for a triplex development up until recently when planning codes have changed and changed that game. And we'll talk about the influence that's having in a second. When you think about the outcome of what could happen, it was obviously 3 units, 3 3x2s. They went from $300,000 up to your mid 400s in the last peak of the boom, down to again like $280,000, $250,000. I saw a couple of triplexes, secondhand ones, just before COVID. They've risen again, haven't they?
Yes, they have for sure. So again, it's a supply issue. So the demand is through the roof at the moment. 9 times out of 10, it's a multiple offer situation when we bring a villa onto the market. Right now, established villas in Balga, we're talking anywhere between 500 to 550. Some cases even a bit higher for your up to 10 years old villa. Then obviously when you go older than that, the price dips. But your average, say, 10-year-old villa at the moment would be sitting somewhere in that low to mid 500 range. Your brand new stuff is definitely cracking the mid to high fives at the minute, but there's just not much brand new stock available.
This is new records.
Yes, it is. Yes,
we're in new ground here, and
sure.
And a lot of people be scratching their head, like in most suburbs, going, geez, I never thought I'd get to
this.
this.
Yeah, for sure, and it only goes up from there. So, Westminster, for example, the last few established villas that we've sold there, which a lot of this data as well, Trent, isn't available online because, we're talking about what's happening in real time, not what sold 3 months ago, because the market's changing so rapidly. And again, in Westminster and in Nollamara, the supply and demand, demand is outweighing supply, probably 30 to 1 in most cases. And each time we bring a property
30 to 1.
I'd say 30 to 1. Each time we bring a property to market, we would expect at least 10 solid written offers per villa. And there's a couple of reasons for that. There's not as much brand new stock as what there usually is. That's now driving the established market. Just going off the last few that we've sold 3x2 in Westminster, up to 10 years old again, they've cracked the 600 mark. So, sitting low 620s, 630s is where the last few have sold 3x2s in Westminster, and then moving up again to Nollamara, same sort of price point, but sitting more around the mid 600s, and your brand new stuff's getting close to cracking the 700,000s now for 3x2s. And we just had another one go yesterday, which was a 3x1 on a 300 square metre block. We had 11 offers in 1 week in Nollamara, and that one went for 700,000, 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom.
Wow.
And the price there effectively doubled in the last 5 years.
That's exactly the story we've been seeing as well. And we can probably say the same thing with the equivalent south of the river, your Coolblups, your Willages. They would be your equivalents there. Historic state housing suburbs that have been blanket zoned R40 to R30. We're seeing similar numbers come out of there, but it is really interesting to see how that's working. And one of the input driving this as well, obviously with supply, is that it's just costing a lot more to supply. And the last boom, I remember you could get a triplex up turnkey for 600 grand, even less in some cases, and obviously less if you were the builder. And there were a lot of builder developers back in the last boom. These days, most of the time, it's costing about 900 grand. So that extra $300,000, the developer either has to find that in the sales, or it's not going to get off the ground in the first place.
And then there was obviously all the building delays through COVID, etc. as well. So there just wasn't as much development as what we historically have seen, and that's what's risen the values for established homes, which is great for the established home owner. But yeah, it's definitely taken a massive turn, and it's just nowhere near enough supply to the demand at the moment. And it's going to take a lot more stock to come on the market in those areas to suck up all the current demand.
When we think about supply and the evidence we've seen on the ground over, let's say, the last 10 years of the peaks of how many houses per street were getting built at some points, the street was clogged up with brickies 10 years ago. And now, as you said, there's a handful in a suburb getting built. And a big reason for that is because developers haven't been able to get builders to build it. They haven't been able to get prices locked down. There's too much build risk in the market. And at the time that you start the development, it's not stacking up, even though, ironically, it seems that most of the time it would have stacked up if you'd just gone and done it. That's called hope money. We're not big fans of hope money. Yeah. Exactly, especially when a market turns. Now, not to suggest that's going to happen anytime soon, but we've seen it in the past, and you don't want to be that fella who started developing in 2015.
Yeah,
right.
Correct.
The evidence is showing that a big reason for why prices are going up is simply because, as you said, not much is being built at all. Now, you'd be the person who have the most information in this area about what the pipeline looks like. Now that you're starting to see prices rising to these new record levels, do you know of a good number of developers who have been sitting on their hands waiting? Or are there other challenges at play here that would make them go, well, no, it's still not coming up, mate. It's not going to happen?
Don't know of too many guys sitting on their hands and waiting. Just probably a lot of guys that were very active in the area just haven't really done the volume that they have done previously for a bunch of reasons. Obviously, the risk involved, but also, sourcing the land. The land is a lot more scarce now, and uncertainty in the market and in the building industry as a whole. So what I've found now is your typical mum and dad developer, pretty much non-existent in those areas anymore, and it's just your local active builders are the ones that can still make margin when doing these developments. Correct.
Yeah, and I think that's really starting to become a bit of a step change in this area, where finally these suburbs are maturing into the medium density that they were planned to have in the first place. As you said, there's not much left to develop, even if you wanted to. And further to that, the numbers aren't stacking up on the front end, even if they would at the back end over the last couple of years. But looking into the pipeline, one thing that you and I have chatted about recently is what the new medium density code regulations in the state's planning policy, what impact that's going to have on this specific wing we're talking about. Now, I look at the price point, it's affordability, and that is probably the biggest draw card for this area, being affordability for these medium density properties. The infamous Triplex that so many of the urban designers and urban planners in Western Australia hate because of obviously tree canopy and things like that. But what is certainly going to be the outcome now through the medium density code, which is for all people who haven't looked at it, enforcing much larger open space areas, smaller site coverage areas, more setbacks, is pretty much going to make the formula for 3x2s on 728 square meters impossible unless you move to a townhouse situation. Now we're adding an extra, let's say, $150,000 to $200,000 per townhouse to build it. Can your market afford that, Adam? Is that essentially just going to kill the next stage of development?
Yeah, you would think it's going to have a big impact, and the reason being is then the sale prices have to be reflected in that extra build cost, and then when you're talking, if we're looking at what it would be now, your mid eights to maybe 900,000, buyers in that price point have a lot more options.
They're not going to Balga.
They're probably not going to go Balga or Westminster or Nollamara for that price, although we have seen some good results for double stories, cracking the 800s very recently in Westminster. You're definitely going to rule out a massive chunk of the market, and you're ruling out that first home buyer market, which is the market that predominantly buys in these areas. So it's going to have a massive effect unless, it's still very new, it's still very raw. Obviously, a lot of planners are still playing around with it, and someone might come up with a good design where it's going to work single stories, but I don't think it's going to be possible. You might have to incorporate a double story at the back with two singles at the front, whatever the case may be, but it's going to have a massive impact on land prices and a massive impact on what the property is going to sell for at the end result.
And what you're saying essentially is that it's going to force the price of property further up in these suburbs. And for me, that is not a good thing. This isn't what we do this for. We shouldn't be gold plating dwelling specification in affordable areas for starters. We're trying to incentivize infill, and we're making it harder.
It's making it a lot harder, Supplying housing for that first home buyer market, people trying to get their foot in the door of the market, which is very, very challenging at the moment, as we all know. And now you're making it even harder because it's going to push the price points up, or you're going to change your typical 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom villa is going to now turn into a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom.
And what do you think the market's going to do with that, Adam? Have you had conversations or, just the small amount of properties that are 2x1s or 2x2s in these suburbs? Where does the market go with regards to that? Is it a compromise they're willing to make?
In the current market conditions, there's still a market for your 2 bedrooms, most definitely, but it's definitely going to have an impact on pricing. It's going to change buyers that are buying up these sorts of properties. 2 bedrooms isn't going to suit everybody, so it's going to have a big impact across the board. It's not really tested. There's not really too many 2-bedroom villas. There's apartments. Hasn't been many villas built or sold, so there's really no evidence as to what those properties would achieve. I think maybe the investor market may like that. I don't see the owner-occupier market having a massive demand for it. What will happen, like you said, is it's going to drive up the prices even further of the established 3x2s in the area, because there's not going to be any brand new single-story 3x2s to choose from.
Exactly right. The unintended consequence is going to be that the established market will continue to rise because supply is just going to be stymied. And I'm really interested to see where the developer goes. The developer is always seeking to be sensitive to the buying pool. They respond, they create product based on where the demand's going. I'm interested to see whether the developer, if they aren't going to shut up shop in these areas, goes to the 2x2 or the 3x1 with a single carport, or goes to a townhouse and goes all out on the wazoo. And I guess time will tell him that, but certainly what this is doing is going to change the face of the way that new supply comes on in these areas. Some would say it's for the good. I would say that there is a huge trade-off to West Australia's back pocket, the most vulnerable West Australians' back pocket in these areas when it comes to being able to access the most affordable suburbs in Perth. And it isn't just Balga, Westminster, Nollamara. It extends up to Girraween, Kundoola, Mirrabooka, these suburbs just north in the city of Wanneroo that have very similar original land parcels as well.
Yeah, it's going to be very challenging, and unless somebody comes up with a good design that something can fit that's going to be affordable for buyers, it's going to be interesting to see the way it goes. It could even eventually turn into just duplex blocks and no longer 3-unit sites, and they could just be duplex. But then again, changes the price point.
And what are we achieving there? We're supposed to be providing infill. We have local government targets of this many properties are zoned R40 for this many times 3 houses, and suddenly we're underdeveloping just to meet markets.
When the demand has never been higher from buyers, and the shortage of housing availability has never been shorter. So
it's very confusing to me how this has been passed. Whilst the state government is complicit in this, they understand what they're doing. They have made the decision that by trying to retain larger open spaces in backyards, they're aware this is going to force a change to the housing type in the area and a massive increase in the base price of these suburbs too. Yep. So where they expect first home buyers to be buying in the future, I'm not sure. But certainly I think it's important to have this podcast today because I don't know a better test case or case study for the outcomes of where the medium density code is going to send the infill market in Western Australia than your wing in Balga, Westminster and Nollamara. When it comes to your pipeline, generally, we were saying off air that you usually ran about 15 properties at a time and maybe a third of them would sell every week a few years ago.
Yeah.
How's it looking now?
We're still experiencing large transaction volume, but the weekends are a lot different now, Trent, because there's so much activity. After that first 1 or 2 weekends of opening a property, there's generally multiple offers and really good results being achieved. So the turnover is a lot faster. So the weekends look a lot different. A little bit extra time with the family on the weekends at the moment.
Well, yes, that's the reality of a real estate agent right now is their work is actually trying to find listings rather than trying to sell properties because the properties nearly sell themselves if they're presented well. Your job is just to maximise the value for the sale.
Get the best result, exactly.
Median sales times have gone from 60 days down to 10.
Yeah, well, our average days on market in those areas at the moment is 7, and that's only because we force a minimum of 3 home opens because I don't think you're doing, your sellers any good if you're taking the first offer after the first
home open. So you do a weekend, a midweek, and another weekend?
We'll do Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday. And generally after that third home open, you're in a multiple offer situation, and then that's when we can get the best result for our sellers. We don't really consider offers earlier on in the piece because it's not giving all the buyers an opportunity to come through the home. But that's our average days on market at the moment. So
and by that time, you're pretty certain you've got multiple offers?
9 times out of 10 in the current market, yes. Yeah.
That's not going to change for quite a while, Adam.
Not while there's that much demand, no.
Demand is going to stay constant. Supply, as we've provided in this case study today, is waning, is getting worse. It's not getting better. There's no light at the end of the tunnel that you're seeing on the ground of 20 local developers getting ready to ramp up.
No,
definitely not.
No.
So this is where things are going to be at. For everyone listening who is in the development space or holding property in the area, maybe to the dismay of Adam, my advice would be to hold because you've got value here. And if you are thinking of selling, it may not be this year for you that's going to maximize it. It may, and I'm sure, Adam, you say that to a lot of people who don't need to sell right now. They will be a seller at some point. There is a lot of growth left in this market. And to people who are looking to buy, the best time was yesterday. It actually was 5 years ago. And the next best time is this weekend.
It's most definitely right because all we're seeing is that increase week on week. There's no doubt about that. Prices have continually increased in these areas consistently over the last 2 to 3 years at a very rapid and aggressive rate.
Adam Naumovski, #1 sales agent in most of this area and certainly a Grandmaster many, many times in a row and many, many times to come, I'm sure. Thanks for coming in, sharing your time, and thanks for being a big supporter of this podcast. It's been quite a few years in between innings, and let's make it a bit shorter next time.
It has, mate. Thanks for having me again. Always a pleasure, and look forward to next time.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!